When Lydia Harper first saw the house on Brook Hollow, she felt an involuntary shiver run down her spine. It stood as a testament to a bygone era, a three-story Victorian with gables and a wraparound porch, shadowed by ancient oaks whose twisted branches seemed to grasp at the air like skeletal fingers. The townsfolk of Ashford Falls whispered about the house, speaking of tragedies and disappearances that tainted its history. But to Lydia, a struggling novelist desperate for inspiration, the house was a siren call she couldn't resist. She pushed open the wrought-iron gate, its hinges groaning in protest, and made her way up the weed-choked path. Her footsteps echoed in the stillness, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. As she approached the front door, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing, waiting. Lydia fumbled with the keys the real estate agent had given her. They were heavy, old-fashioned, with intricate designs that suggested they belonged to another century. The lock clicked open with surprising ease, and she stepped inside, her breath catching in her throat. The interior was a stark contrast to the dilapidated exterior. The foyer was grand, with a sweeping staircase that seemed to beckon her upward. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the stained glass windows, casting eerie patterns on the hardwood floor. Lydia set down her bags, her eyes scanning the room. She could already feel the ideas forming, the house whispering its secrets to her eager mind. She wandered through the rooms, each one more captivating than the last. The parlor was filled with antique furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts waiting to be unveiled. The kitchen, though outdated, had a rustic charm with its cast-iron stove and porcelain sink. But it was the study that truly captured Lydia's attention. The room was lined with bookshelves, each one crammed with leather-bound volumes that smelled of aged paper and ink. A massive oak desk dominated the center, its surface cluttered with yellowing manuscripts and quills. Lydia ran her fingers over the desk, feeling a connection to the unknown writers who had sat there before her. As she explored, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling of being drawn towards something. It was an almost magnetic pull that led her to a small door at the back of the study. The door was locked, but a quick search of the desk drawers produced a brass key that fit perfectly. With a creak, the door swung open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Heart-pounding with a mix of fear and excitement, Lydia grabbed a flashlight from her bag and started down the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and the scent of damp earth grew stronger. At the bottom, she found herself in a cellar lined with stone walls. The flashlight beam danced over wooden crates and dusty shelves filled with jars of preserves that looked as old as the house itself. In the far corner, something glinted. Lydia approached cautiously, her flashlight revealing an antique doll sitting atop a wooden crate. The doll was exquisite, dressed in a frilly lace gown with eyes that seemed almost lifelike. Its porcelain face was flawless, framed by ringlets of auburn hair. As Lydia reached out to touch the doll, she felt a sudden chill, as if a cold hand had brushed against her skin. She jerked back, her heart racing. The doll's eyes seemed to follow her, a sinister glint in their depths. Lydia backed away, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She hurried back up the stairs, locking the door behind her. As she leaned against it, trying to calm her racing heart, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just awoken something that had been sleeping for far too long. The first night in the house was restless. Lydia tossed and turned in the grand canopy bed she had chosen in one of the upstairs bedrooms. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps, every gust of wind like a whispered secret. She finally fell into a fitful sleep, only to be awakened by a soft, persistent tapping. Lydia sat up, her heart pounding. The tapping continued, rhythmic and insistent, coming from the study below. She grabbed the flashlight from her bedside table and crept downstairs, the beam of light slicing through the darkness. The study was just as she had left it, but the tapping persisted, coming from the locked door to the cellar. Lydia's hand trembled as she unlocked the door and descended the stairs once more. The flashlight beam fell on the doll, still sitting on the crate, its eyes glinting in the darkness. Lydia approached cautiously, her breath visible in the cold, damp air. The tapping was louder now, almost as if it was coming from within the walls. She turned her flashlight toward the far corner of the cellar and froze. There, scratched into the stone wall, were the words, "Help me," written in what looked like dried blood. Lydia's stomach churned, and she stumbled back, her flashlight flickering. The tapping grew louder, more frantic, and then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. She bolted back up the stairs, locking the door behind her. She tried to rationalize what she had seen, but her mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. She needed answers, and she knew she wouldn't find them alone. The next morning, Lydia visited the town's library, hoping to uncover more about the house's history. The librarian, Mrs. Jensen, was a frail, elderly woman with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through Lydia. "The Harper house," Mrs. Jensen said, her voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and caution. "It has a dark history, my dear. Many believe it's cursed." Lydia leaned in, her curiosity piqued. "What happened there?" Mrs. Jensen sighed, pulling out a dusty old ledger. The house was built in the late 1800s by Jonathan Harper, a wealthy industrialist. He lived there with his wife, Eleanor, and their young daughter, Clara. Tragedy struck when Clara disappeared one night. They searched the house and the surrounding woods, but she was never found. Eleanor was devastated and took her own life shortly after. Jonathan lived the rest of his days as a recluse, consumed by grief and guilt. Lydia felt a chill run down her spine. And the doll in the cellar? Mrs. Jensen's eyes widened. Clara's favorite toy. She was holding it the night she vanished. Some say her spirit is still attached to it, trapped between worlds, waiting to be found. Lydia thanked Mrs. Jensen and left the library, her mind racing. She had come to Ashford Falls seeking inspiration for her novel, but she had found something much darker. The house on Brook Hollow wasn't just a place to write, it was a story waiting to be told, a mystery begging to be solved. That night, Lydia sat at the oak desk in the study, her fingers poised over the typewriter. She began to write, the words flowing effortlessly as if guided by an unseen hand. The story of the Harper family unfolded before her, each keystroke revealing more of their tragic tale. As the hours passed, the house seemed to come alive around her. Shadows flickered in the corners of the room, and the air grew colder. Lydia's fingers flew over the keys, driven by an urgency she couldn't explain. She was no longer just writing a story, she was unraveling a dark secret that had been buried for over a century. Days turned into weeks, and Lydia's obsession with the house and its history grew. She spent hours poring over old records, speaking with townsfolk, and delving into the lives of the Harper family. Each new piece of information only deepened the mystery, and she found herself drawn repeatedly to the cellar and the doll that seemed to hold the key to it all. One evening, as Lydia sat at the desk, her candle casting long shadows on the walls, she heard the tapping again. This time, it was accompanied by a soft whispering, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her writing, but the sound grew louder, more insistent. With a sense of dread, Lydia made her way to the cellar. The air was colder than usual, and the tapping had taken on a frantic rhythm. She approached the doll, her heart pounding, and reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers brushed against the porcelain, a voice echoed in her mind, clear and haunting. "Find me." Lydia stumbled back, her flashlight falling to the floor. The cellar was plunged into darkness, and the whispering grew louder, surrounding her. She fumbled for the flashlight, her hands shaking, and when she finally managed to turn it on, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The words, "Help me," had been joined by a new message, scratched into the wall with the same dried blood. "She knows." Lydia's mind raced. Who was she? What did she know? She needed to understand, but the answer seemed just out of reach, hidden in the shadows of the past. Desperate for guidance, Lydia turned to the one person she hadn't yet spoken to, Father O'Malley, the town's priest. He was a grizzled old man with a kind face and a reputation for being a bit of an eccentric. When Lydia told him about the house and the messages, he listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each word. "The Harper house is a place of great sorrow," Father O'Malley said, his voice tinged with sadness. "Spirits linger there, trapped by their own pain. If Clara's spirit is reaching out to you, it means she's seeking closure. Something is holding her here, something she cannot escape." Lydia felt a glimmer of hope. "How can I help her?" Father O'Malley's eyes were piercing. "You must find what binds her to this world and set her free. But be careful, Lydia. The darkness in that house is powerful. It will not let go easily." Armed with Father O'Malley's advice, Lydia returned to the house with renewed determination. She scoured every room, every nook and cranny, searching for anything that might explain Clara's disappearance. She found old letters, faded photographs, and diary entries that painted a picture of a family slowly unraveling under the weight of their grief. One night, as she was sifting through a box of old papers in the attic, she found a small, leather-bound journal. It was Clara's diary, the last entry dated the night she disappeared. Lydia's hands trembled as she read the final, hurried lines. "He watches me from the shadows. I hear him whisper my name. I'm scared. If I disappear, please find me. He's coming." Lydia's blood ran cold. Who was Clara talking about? Who had taken her? And why had no one found her diary before now? The answer seemed to lie in the cellar, with the doll that held Clara's spirit. Lydia knew she had to confront whatever darkness lingered there, but she couldn't do it alone. She needed someone who understood the supernatural forces at play, someone who could help her navigate the perilous path ahead. Lydia reached out to Father O'Malley again, sharing the contents of Clara's diary. The priest's face grew grave as he read the final entry. "This is more serious than I thought," he said. "There's a malevolent presence in that house, something that preys on the innocent. Clara's spirit is trapped because of it. What can we do?" Lydia asked, her voice trembling. Father O'Malley looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. "We must perform a ritual to cleanse the house and free Clara's spirit. But it will be dangerous. The entity will fight to keep its hold." Lydia nodded, her resolve firm. "I'm ready." That night, they prepared for the ritual. Father O'Malley brought candles, incense, and holy water, while Lydia gathered items that had belonged to Clara: her diary, a locket with her picture, and, reluctantly, the doll from the cellar. They set up in the study, the air heavy with anticipation. Father O'Malley began to chant, his voice steady and strong. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Lydia felt a chill run down her spine as the temperature dropped, and the whispering began anew, louder and more insistent. The room grew darker, the shadows deepening, and Lydia could sense the presence of the entity, a malevolent force that seemed to emanate from the doll. She held the locket tightly, her heart pounding. Father O'Malley's chanting grew louder, more urgent. "By the power of light, I command you to leave this place. Release the spirit of Clara Harper and return to the darkness from whence you came." A gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. The whispering grew into a cacophony of voices, all pleading, crying, and screaming. Lydia felt a pressure in her chest, as if an invisible hand was squeezing the life out of her. Then, through the chaos, she heard a clear, familiar voice. "Find me." With a burst of determination, Lydia stepped forward, holding the locket and the doll. "Clara, I'm here. Show me the way." The room fell silent, the air heavy with anticipation. The doll's eyes seemed to glow, and Lydia felt a pull, guiding her towards the cellar. She descended the stairs, the flashlight beam steady despite her trembling hands. At the bottom, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. A loose stone in the wall, just below the message, "Help me." She pried it loose, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a bundle of old, decayed fabric, and as she carefully unwrapped it, she found the skeletal remains of a child. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. Clara had been here all along, hidden away, her spirit unable to rest. Tears streamed down Lydia's face as she cradled the tiny bones. "I found you," she whispered. "You're free now." As if in response, a warmth spread through the cellar, and the oppressive darkness lifted. Lydia felt a sense of peace, a gentle presence that seemed to embrace her. Clara's spirit was finally at rest. The days following the discovery were a blur. The authorities were called, and Clara's remains were given a proper burial next to her mother. The house on Brook Hollow felt different, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Lydia continued to write, but her novel had taken on a new direction. It wasn't just a horror story anymore. It was a tale of redemption, of a lost soul finding peace. The words flowed easily, and she knew that Clara's spirit was guiding her, helping her to tell the story that had been buried for so long. Father O'Malley visited often, offering his support and wisdom. He had become a friend, someone who understood the darkness Lydia had faced and the strength it had taken to overcome it. One evening, as the sun set over Ashford Falls, Lydia stood by Clara's grave, the doll in her hands. She placed it gently on the ground, a final gift for the child who had endured so much. "Rest in peace, Clara," she whispered. "You're free now." As she turned to leave, Lydia felt a warmth on her shoulder, like a gentle touch. She looked back and saw nothing, but she knew Clara was there, watching over her. With a sense of closure and a heart full of gratitude, Lydia walked away, ready to embrace the future. The house on Brook Hollow had given her more than just inspiration for a novel. It had given her a purpose, a connection to a past that had needed to be healed. And in doing so, it had healed her too. The shadows that had haunted the house were gone, replaced by the light of hope and the promise of new beginnings. Lydia knew that she would carry Clara's story with her always, a reminder of the power of love, courage, and the unbreakable bond between the living and the dead. As she drove away from Ashford Falls, Lydia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to share her story with the world. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of her mind, she heard a soft, grateful whisper. "Thank you."